Canada's broken because we're stupid.
These are Muslim values. These are Canadian values.
How many kids did you molest with Jeffrey Epstein?
More than just elbows.
Why is the Prime Minister cavorting around the world with other world leaders when he should be at home making sure that those major projects actually get underway? Where's the certainty that could come from repealing that legislation that's standing in the way from increasing economic growth? That's what he needs to be doing.
Hello, everybody. Aaron here, Canadian Looney. What's been going on with Legacy Media? They've been doing journalism. Is that what's going on now? Very strange. Happy to see it. Vasi Capello's grilled Gary Adesangre the other night. She put the minister in his place. She's a capable journalist when she uses his skills. That's what is so frustrating when she's selling the propaganda her bosses give her. Anyhow, let's take a peek. She's got her backbenchers. These panelists are usually not that great, but let's see what Vasi, classy Vasi, can do, with real journalism if she's going to use her skills. Let's check this out. Not sure how this is going to go. Could be interesting. Let's take a peek.
Hey, that's something everyone can enjoy.
Grocery prices are terrible.
I wish the member opposite's mother a happy birthday.
We start by wishing the mother of the leader of the opposition happy birthday.
The Parliamentary Budget Officer is projecting a deficit of $68.5 billion, up from just over $51 billion last year. Public debt charges, which are the interest costs on a government's outstanding debt, will also increase, he says, projecting to $55.3 billion, and even going up further in the next few years. The PBO also predicts real GDP growth to decrease to an average of 1.2% in both 2025 and 2026, of course, due to the impact of the trade war with the United States and weakened overall revenue. Jason Jakes spoke, that's the PBO, interim PBO, I should say, spoke about the report just moments ago at a House of Commons committee meeting. Have a listen.
Oh, yeah. It's not a funny fiscal outlook. It's a really serious fiscal outlook. And we don't lightly use the word unsustainable, right? Unsustainable means you don't have the option of saying, maybe I'll wait a couple of years, I'll see how things go. It means if you don't change, this is done.
We'll start with you on this one. I was saying just in the break, this is the interim PBO, so he doesn't have a long con or anything, but he is really swinging high here. He is not holding anything back. What's your take on what he is saying today?
Well, my take is, first of all, happy birthday to Marlene Polyev.
Join the chorus,
lady.
yeah.
Very nice lady. But, he's obviously very concerned about this. He's a professional. He's assessed this. He's looked at the numbers. He has declared that it's unsustainable, meaning that the government is on a track to bankrupt the country. So they've got to get their act together. You can't have it both ways and say you're going to invest, but it's also prudent. I mean, this is just the height of weasel words, and they're going to have to find a way to get the spending in line, or else we're going to see our interest rates rise, we'll see inflation spike. I mean, there's all kinds of serious implications if they don't start to treat this seriously.
So, Marco, do you think, James, though, that thus far the communications from the federal government have been as clear as what Marco just laid out?
No. Look, for 9 years, we were told, hear us now, believe us later, that deficits are going to be good because it'll lead to economic growth. They may not happen right away, but in the fullness of time, this is all going to work out. Well, now here we are. 9 years later, after people saying these aren't deficits, these are investments, and now the fiscal anchors are blown. We had a contraction in the economy, jobless rates are up, investments are down, and it didn't work. The 9 years of Trudeau failed. And by the way, I was struck by two numbers in the report. The number $68 billion, or just north of $68 billion of what's projected to be the deficit for this year. I did a little bit of math. I thought you might like this, Vashi. $68 billion. Put this number in context. Based on market cap and current evaluations of Canadian companies and organizations, this is what $68 billion looks like in the current economy. $68 billion would buy you the Toronto Maple Leafs, the Montreal Canadiens, the Ottawa Senators, the Winnipeg Jets, the Edmonton Oilers, the Calgary Flames, the Vancouver Canucks, the Toronto Blue Jays, the Toronto Raptors, Air Canada, WestJet, Lululemon, Canadian Tire, and you'd have a few $1 billion left over. That's the scale of the deficit that we're talking about.
Connor McDavid, James? That's the question.
Yeah, well, yeah, about $1 billion left over for Connor McDavid. But these are staggering levels of indebtedness, and of course, it's stacked on top of subnational, provincial levels of indebtedness in British Columbia and Ontario that are also unsustainable. We're on a bad track, and I hope that Prime Minister Carney can match his words with his actions. But it's going to be a very, very tough pivot.
I think one of the, just jumping off, if I've internalized what James said, right, and I hate to say it, but do I have to buy the Montreal Canadiens among everything else? Anyway, I'm joking. Don't hate me. I'm a Leafs fan, and I'm now the hate mail will really come. Christy, if I've kind of internalized what James is saying, right, I think one of the key points that I would say, might inform or should inform communications is if you decide that there is still a lot to spend on what you are labeling as investments, you need to do more than tell Canadians that they will get a return on that investment, which is, I think, where like the gap existed with the Trudeau government, right? Like often we were told X, Y, and Z will materialize in this way, and that didn't end up being borne out. So maybe you have to be more specific, and there have to be more sort of, I don't know what, but guardrails or something that show that you will be held accountable for that. What are your thoughts on that communication?
Well, I think obviously communications can always be better. Government's really busy, and they sometimes miss the key points. I think they still got some time to make those points. I heard Minister Champagne saying today, or yesterday, that they're going to keep their guardrails are going to be balancing the budget and getting their GDP to debt ratio under control in 3 years, which makes a lot of sense given the massive mess that Justin Trudeau left them with. And I think the key communications things and the key actual things that they need to be doing are saying, we are going to spend less. And I don't think this idea that they're going to do this, what's ultimately a pretty small cut to the public service that would get it only back down to 2020 levels is something that they should be thinking about expanding. So talking about how they would actually spend less. Because in the Trudeau government, what he was doing is he was figuring out how to spend more on public services and at the same time smothering economic growth, which is how we pay for those services. So I think the Carney plan has got to be, we are going to spend less and we are going to create economic growth. But the reality is the only way you can create economic growth, and I know this from my almost 8 years in government, is you have to invest in economic projects like ports, like railways, like pipelines, like mining infrastructure. That's how you grow the economy, that's how you create jobs, and that's how you create the tax revenue that you need ultimately to get yourself out of a deficit situation. You cannot, when the economy is the way it is right now, with the mess that Justin Trudeau has left, you cannot do this. No one can do it without actually spending a little bit of money to invest in economic growth.
I think the issue is that there's also, Monty, though, other things that they have committed to spending money on that Canadians have, to be fair to the Trudeau government, come to rely on, like childcare, like the Canada Child Benefit, like dental care, like pharmacare, which they have said that they will. And I should be fair, the Conservatives said during the election that they would maintain the current services that Canadian access to. Like, those are big line items as well. So other than the public service, where else do you find, spending cuts? Well,
as Pierre Poilievre said in his interview with you a few days ago, there's $12 billion in spending on consultants that could go away. I think Canadians would cheer that. I think the government needs to move quickly to clear away the No More Pipelines legislation, get some of those major projects moving. I mean, you do have to have economic growth, and it doesn't require money to do that. It requires the government to provide some certainty to companies that are risking hundreds of millions and billions of dollars and have signaled over and over again for a decade they need that certainty. So where is it? Why is the Prime Minister cavorting around the world with other world leaders when he should be at home making sure that those major projects actually get underway? Where's the certainty that could come from repealing that legislation that's standing in the way from increasing economic growth? That's what he needs to be doing. Why is the Prime Minister cavorting around the world with other world leaders when he should be at home making sure that those major projects actually get underway? Where's the certainty that could come from repealing that legislation that's standing in the way from increasing economic growth? That's what he needs to be doing.
I'll give the floor to Marco. Go for it.
Yeah, look, to be clear, I think the fact that we not only introduced but passed Bill C-5 does set the conditions for a faster approval. The one project, one review is a way in which you can cut through some of the redundancy and see those projects get shovels in the ground. And that's exactly what the Prime Minister did a short time ago. And there's another tranche of announcements that are coming. And now we want to see those projects get built. I will say I do think it is important that as part of the overall economic agenda, that the Prime Minister continues to bolster our trade relations abroad. And that's what he's doing in the UK. That's what he did in Mexico. And certainly that's what he's continuing to do through a very set of sophisticated negotiations with the United States. So you got to be able to do both. It's not just about your ability to do trade abroad. You also need a domestic economic agenda. And by having C-5 passed with major projects, by launching Building Canada Homes to double the amount of housing starts that we see every year, by reinvigorating and creating a new defense industry spending, you're going to be able to create Canadian jobs and get the economy firing on all cylinders.
But I guess the sort of central cleavage point is, if I'm listening to everything in the aggregate, James, yes, you're saying you're going to cut spending. I understand that. Do you need to invest a ton in order to spur economic growth, or are there other things you can do in concert to maybe mitigate some of the level of investment? I'm not sure. It seems like we'll wait till November to find out the answer, but what is your thought?
Yeah, I mean, look, he will, I think, offer to try to do some of that. But there's clear evidence that there are some failed government policies that aren't working, that are bad for the economy and wasting a lot of money. I mean, the Build Canada Homes project that Marco just outlined, I mean, it's great. They're booking $14 billion. It's great in thematics. But if you look at the development community across Canada, they're all looking at this and saying, this is crazy. This doesn't make any sense. $14 billion for a few thousand homes, it doesn't make any sense at all. And the scale of spend is as outrageous relative to what the return would be. This is a supply and demand issue with all kinds of regional development issues that doesn't require $14 billion from the government of Canada to be funneled through bureaucracy. It's a bad policy. And we've already spent $750 million, that you talked about yesterday on your show, Vashi, $750 million on a gun buyback program that hasn't recaptured a single firearm in this country or made anybody safer. If you can't admit the obvious stuff that has failed is all around you, and you can't sort of reverse course on those policies. The Prime Minister has shown some leadership and done that on carbon pricing and a few other policies that made sense to reverse on. But on the spending side, I hope there is some courage shown in the November budget, because there's some debris at his feet that is easy to sweep aside of failed policies that cost a lot of money, that would do a lot of good in order to get our fiscal balance back in the right direction.
And there's more than that,
you get the last word.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the federal government should be thinking about figuring how can they have fewer departments in government? They've got a whole bunch of departments that just double up with what provincial governments are already doing, which is in provincial jurisdiction. Many of those could be slimmed down, or some of them eliminated entirely, which would mean we save a lot of money in what we spend without cutting public programs. And it isn't, but I will just finish with this, it isn't accurate to say that provincial and federal governments don't need to spend money to spur the kinds of economic growth we need for the resource sector. Governments do need to invest in ports. That's not being entirely done by the private sector, and it won't be. Government builds highways. That's not done by the private sector for the most part, and it isn't. And so they are also going to have to think about working with First Nations, and whether there are going to be monetary settlements involved in that. I mean, and training workers. So there's a lot of government spending that needs to be made in order to support the growth of the economy, and in order to support the investment that should rightfully come from the private sector in our resource sector. And I think that when they say they want to spend, that's, I think, what they're talking about.
Okay, well, we'll find out. Just about a month to go. I'm going to take a quick commercial break. Our front bench is sticking around. There's a very interesting, I guess you could call it, fight brewing between Ontario Premier Doug Ford, who blasted the federal justice minister today as the federal government urges the Supreme Court to set some limits on how provinces can use the notwithstanding clause. Our front bench is back in a moment to talk about that.
There's not one person I've talked to that has said, we want to give the judges, more politically appointed judges, more authority. I haven't heard one person. But he's so bent on going up there, he messed up the immigration, he's messed up housing, now they put him in as Attorney General. He needs to focus on what counts for the people. Premiers across the country are on fire. This is the worst decision Prime Minister Carney has ever done.
That is Ontario Premier Doug Ford digging into Sean Fraser after the federal justice minister announced his intention last week to ask the Supreme Court to limit how Section 33 of the Canadian Constitution is used. Better known as the notwithstanding clause. It's a sort of get out of charter free card that allows governments to pass laws that contravene certain rights and freedoms guaranteed in the charter. Fraser sent his request as Canada's top court hears a landmark case on Quebec's secularism law, known as Bill 21, which that province's government used the notwithstanding clause to pass. Fraser writing in part about his decision, this case is about more than the immediate issues before the court. The Supreme Court's decision will shape how both federal and provincial governments may use the notwithstanding clause for years to come. Let's bring back the front bench to get into this one. Christy Clark, Marco Mendicino, James Moore, and Monty Solberg. This morning I was thinking I had wanted to talk about it with this panel. Last week it didn't work out. This week, and I was thinking, oh gosh, is there anything that's going to come that's going to be new and relevant? And like
Jimmy
usual,
Kimmel's
Doug Ford
back
steps
on.
up to the microphone.
Jimmy Kimmel's back on.
Doug Ford steps up to the microphone and gives me a reason. Christy, I have to start with you as the former premier of the group here. Is this, the accusation from certain corners has been that the federal government's ask of the Supreme Court amounts to overreach. Do you think it is?
Well, yes, the only person on this panel who has ever contemplated actually using the notwithstanding clause in government, I can say, I think it's really important that we preserve it. And I will say, Doug Ford is right, which is the notwithstanding clause was included in the Constitution in order to get premiers to agree with the passing of the law, the new law, because they understood that what it would do is it would give the Supreme Court of Canada, which is appointed by the federal government, which is a partisan institution, the federal government, at least in its majority, it would give them the right to be able to make laws that Canadians who are going to be expected to abide by those laws have no say over, because you can't elect judges if you don't like what they said. And Doug Ford is absolutely spot on right about that. I'm going to add a little color to this, though. I do think that the reason the federal government has decided to get on this issue is not just because of Quebec. I think part of it is because Danielle Smith is bringing forward legislation on trans rights. They want to find a way into that issue, be able to talk about that issue, seem like they're on the right side of that issue without getting all tangled up in all the identity politics that Justin Trudeau got tangled up in. And I think, it's absolutely the wrong direction for them to take. They should be focusing on economic growth and balancing the budget and creating jobs. And instead, what they're talking about is how they can give judges that they appoint more power to make laws that Canadians can never change.
They say in response to that criticism, James, that it's more about, trying to put limits on the ability, I think, of it to be invoked prior to a law being passed. That essentially the way it's being used by provinces isn't in line with the way it was intended. That's the argument they're putting forward. What do you make of that?
Well, I'm sort of struck by two things. One is, all of us have had the privilege of being in government on the government sides of legislatures of the federal parliament. And, whenever something comes across your desk, you're often challenged with the question of, do we actually need to do this, number one? If yes, do we actually need to do it right now? Are there not some other concerns that need to be pressed upon? And to that point, Doug Ford makes obviously a very valid and important point that when it comes to criminal justice issues and the attention of the Attorney General and Justice Minister of Canada, this should not be the dominant focal point. I understand there's a dynamic in the province of Quebec, but there are tensions in the Federation at all times when it comes to these kinds of matters. And I don't know why this is so pressing right now. You would have to knock on about 400 to 500,000 doors in the country before you found your first voter who said this should be the number one priority of the Justice Minister and Attorney General of Canada, number one. Second thing is, Doug Ford was mostly right, but what he was wrong about is that, in the United States, the courts are supreme. In the UK, the Parliament is supreme. In Canada, we actually have kind of a hybrid model where we actually try to strike an appropriate balance, where we do have a Charter of Rights that protects citizens from the overreach and overbearing of government. That is true, but that capacity is limited, and the notwithstanding clause is part of the Charter because the Charter wouldn't exist without it as being an essential compromise to find an appropriate balance. Because there are times where courts do overreach and do go beyond, the stretch and reach of majorities of the public who are not quite prepared to go there yet. So it can be invoked on a sunsetted basis with limited reviews, and it has to come back. And we've tried to strike an appropriate balance that I think has worked for Canada for a really long time. And to upset that balance for almost no political upside on the precipice of 2026 with the Quebec election on the horizon, I don't get why we're doing this now when there are other priorities.
Exactly.
Do you think, Marco, the balance is the right one?
Well, I think the answer is it's a tricky balance. But I want to come back to a point that James just made and others have made, which is that somehow this is being put on the table by the federal government. I mean, this is litigation that is being brought before the Supreme Court of Canada, and the Attorney General of Canada, Sean Fraser, has an obligation to respond. And I think his position distilled is that there is a risk that the notwithstanding clause becomes a shortcut to override rights. And that has a very tangible impact on people when it comes to religious expression, sexual orientation, labor rights, the construct of municipal governments. And so I do think it's responsible for the government of Canada to, in essence, be a friend of the court and say, here are the guiding constitutional principles which should help you decide this case. But I also too agree and sympathize with Premier Doug Ford that there are bigger priorities when it comes to the law and order agenda. And so I do think it is important. And I know that the Minister of Justice, Sean Fraser, and others are very concerned with putting forward a bail reform package that will toughen laws to crack down on repeat offenders. And I think the more that we can focus on that part of the agenda, then the less we'll get like the outbursts that we saw from Doug today. And without telling tales out of school, I know what that feels like. So you try to avoid it as much as possible.
I think if I were to sort of think about the politics of it for a second, Monty, it feels as though, look, premiers across the country are worried about the bail reform stuff and about, general levels of crime. Like, I understand the point that they're making that, like, there are bigger fish to fry. And the other thing that has been, I think, notable about the last number of months is the degree to which the federal government and the provinces are talking, and the amount of dialogue and the amount of, surprises like the one we talked about a few weeks ago when Premier Smith in Alberta was like singing the federal government's praises on this major projects list. So this feels like, I think, to the premiers, a needless irritant. And it's like one of the few schisms right now between provinces and the federal government.
I just don't know how it happened. This is a time where the minister needs to stand up to his public servants, to the lawyers in his department, and say, no, we're not going there. It is an unnecessary irritant. It creates all kinds of uncertainty. It's way off the agenda of most premiers. In fact, the government in general, the federal government in general, I just don't see why they're going there. And I think it would be quite wise of the minister to back down on this, withdraw this approach. They can fight it in other ways, I guess, but I think it's a real mistake to really stir the pot, cause that kind of upset that naturally will occur in Quebec, but also in Alberta for sure, and elsewhere too. So I think Doug Ford is spot on. Why are we going into this right now? It doesn't make any sense at all.
Well, is it possible, Christy, that the concern that they have is genuine, that basically something that was supposed to be on a temporary basis could have very permanent impacts on restricting rights?
Well, look, we have had this Charter of Rights and the notwithstanding clause for a long time in Canada, and it's worked.
For a while.
So
yeah.
I'm not sure. Again, I'm mystified that it's coming up. I don't think it's just the magic of the bureaucrats shoving something on the minister's desk. I really do think that this is linked to the election in Quebec and the trans legislation that's coming up in Alberta, and they're trying to find a way to look like they are responding to these things. It's uncomfortable for them. And if I was offering them advice, I would say, you don't need to. Stay focused on the bread and butter, get the economy growing, shrink the size and cost of government, fight the tariffs, do what people elected you to do, and don't get sidetracked with some of this other stuff.
James, I did just get into my inbox a statement. We asked for Minister Fraser to comment on what Premier Ford is saying. We just got a statement back in. Canadians are counting on us to adopt stronger laws to help ensure their communities are safe. The federal government will deliver on this commitment. Essentially, the entire statement references the upcoming pieces of legislation, which I think actually speaks to the politics of what we were just talking about, right? Like the premiers want to be talking about bail reform and addressing what people in their communities are concerned about with crime. This statement references all that. I'm just looking at it, but I don't see many things about the notwithstanding clause in there.
Yeah. Well, so this is a politics show, right? So the politics and the issues management that the government could have taken about this that would have mitigated the blow up today from Premier Ford would have been for the Justice Minister to go to, frankly, each of the provinces, do a lap, go to each of the provinces and announce some justice legislation with the premiers and with their provincial attorneys general and talk about the other stuff that they're doing so that the provinces know that they have an ally and announce some stuff in there, some tough on crime measures that have the support of provinces, and then maybe back end it with this, maybe. But even with that, but that would be sort of managing it and having good relations with the provinces as opposed to surprising them, then you get this blow up. However, I still believe in my first intervention, which was that, as a friend of mine often says, to succeed in government, the main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing. This is not the main thing for Canadian voters. They're focused on the cost of living. They're anxious about Donald Trump. They're worried about the $68 billion deficit and the rising dynamic of a failed economy. That's the main thing, not some internecine battle between lawyers and academics about the reach of the notwithstanding clause hypothetically in the future. Get to the issues that Canadians care about.
That's right.
Marco?
Well, I'd just like to see James put on some lawyer robes and go argue before the Supreme Court of Canada. I know that's really what he'd like to do. But actually, look, there are some important impacts in the Supreme Court of Canada case. As I said earlier, the individual rights which are at stake and which could be placed in jeopardy by a preemptive and successive invocation of the notwithstanding clause is important. But that does not change anything that I said in the first intervention, which is that the real priority here when it comes to law and order, and frankly when it comes to defending people's charter rights to go about their communities in a way that is safe and secure, is to table that bail reform package and to, as James said, work closely with the provinces and the territories to ensure that they can do that announcement together. And I know that's something that Minister Fraser is very much focused on doing.
Yeah, it feels like that announcement on the bail reform has got to come soon, because already behind the scenes, a lot of provinces are saying, oh, it feels, at least communicating to me, it feels like it might be watered down. Like they need to address the issue fast. Well, it takes one more incident before not just Doug Ford, but other premiers start doing press conferences and pounding their hand on the desk. I mean, it's having a real impact on their constituents. And, Doug Ford was worked up, but that's because people in places like Brampton are experiencing carjackings and crazy violent crimes that we just didn't really know about until the last few years, quite candidly. And we need to see that bail reform legislation come quickly, or you're going to see a lot of other premiers getting pretty upset.
Hey, that's something everyone can enjoy.
It's very interesting to see that front bench. That's different than what CTV has been forcing us to watch recently. It seems like they possibly have turned a leaf. That would be a relief. Like on that panel, they had Marco Mendicino, but besides him, everybody was saying, we need change in this country now. People need to pay attention and hold the government accountable. That hasn't been going on CTV or CBC or legacy media here in Canada at all for the last number of years, and it has been getting a lot worse. I hope they turn the corner. Vassie, when she's being a journalist, is much more enjoyable than when she's selling that propaganda. I know she's too smart to be doing that stuff, without it keeping her up. And anyway, good to see. Interesting. Mark Carney, more people are going to be paying attention if the legacy media turns against you. What a weird thing. Maybe he's spending so much time on the road, he's unaware that this is happening in Canada, that many people are tuning in. That's it. Aaron, Canadian Looney, like, share, subscribe. We'll catch you in the next video. Thank you all so much for watching. Come and check out one of the live shows. We follow frontline politics, the stuff that actually happens in Parliament. Sometimes we take a peek at the news too, just to see the way that they're trying to present what actually happens. Usually it's got a slight on it. Anyway, That's it. Thanks for watching, gang. We'll catch you in the next video.